Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay. I'll go home. You can take the kids. I'll start moving.
Whenever you're ready. I didn't realize I preached that long. You should have cut me off. You just said, just.
Everybody in the entrance that's going to be here, come in, please.
I always say 2-minute warning, and then they start leaving for the parking lot. Okay, we're going to start in just a minute. I think I'm live. Okay, I'm good. Yeah. All right. All right. Let's begin. Thank you for being here this afternoon or this morning, and taking a little time out of your schedule to listen to what I'm going to tell you about Ukraine. I'll start off with a common myth or whatever that many people think. We do not have any missionaries in Ukraine. I don't know a bit of Ukrainian. Every time I go there, I have a translator, and there are a number of people that will serve as translators for me. I have a monthly Bible class with the pastors that I have a translator for. I have a weekly deacon class that I teach that, again, have a translator. And we are restarting our seminary program, and that will be used. All this is Zoom and with translators. One of my former members who is now in the ministry, Carl DeMars, is teaching some Hebrew and Greek courses to one seminarian. The seminary in St. Sophia, which is in Ternopil, with the T, Ternopil, in the western part of Europe, closed probably around 2012. And so we have no seminary in Ukraine right now, and we have pastors that are reaching retirement age. And so that is a concern with the congregations that we have, to have future pastors there that will serve. We have one young person involved in the pastoral track there in Ukraine, taking classes. He'll probably be ready in a year or two for the ministry. And so hopefully we can get some of these deacons that I'm having classes with to go into the pastoral track so that we can have pastors. Similar to us, we have 160 vacancies now in the Wells, and you are living it here. As a matter of fact, our congregation in Grace will be vacant as of the end of May. I will be retiring at the end of May. I will keep on as the Wells liaison to the Ukrainian Lutheran Church after that. For, as World Mission Administrator Larry Schlomer said to me, as long as you want the position, it is yours to keep until you want to retire from that as well. So that's a little bit about what is happening there with regard to the ULC. So what are we doing? Why am I here? Why am I a liaison? I'll start off by, there were a number of comments that were made early on when I took the position, and the comments were, why in the world are we supporting Ukraine? Why are we giving subsidy to them? Well, little secret, we're giving subsidy to a number of church bodies around the world. It's not just Ukraine. We have less missionaries now in the field than we used to have, and there will probably continue to be that. We have a wonderful PSI program at the seminary that trains pastors in other countries. And what the PSI program does is they arrange for pastors, a lot of times retired pastors, who would be willing to teach a course. And that is how then a lot of pastors are trained in these other countries. And so then you have as you would say, the native people being pastors of their congregations. And it's been very successful. There's a lot of things I could say this morning, but suffice it to say, world missions and Christianity and the Christian faith and Lutheranism is really growing around the world. Perhaps here in the United States it's rather stagnant, and it's kind of like the lament I had in the sermon this morning. We are losing a lot of young people. A lot of young people are kind of shying away from the church, and maybe it is that reason, why? What's the purpose of going to church and that type of thing? But it is happening here. But around the world, we're growing quite rapidly. Some of our church bodies are increasing by leaps and bounds. I mean, you probably know what's going on in Vietnam. And in Africa, it is just a lot of opportunities there. And you'll hear about a little bit in Ukraine as well. And so why are we subsidizing them? Because we're able to. We're not able to subsidize everyone. We're not able to subsidize them to the point of what they actually need. But we can do something. And so we are doing something. And so I think it's a very wonderful opportunity that we have to support that church body, and we support it financially, and then with the services that I offer to them, Bible studies and teaching and so on, with some other pastors offer to them. So it's a wonderful thing that's going on in the ULC and in the Ukrainian Lutheran Church. How did Wells get involved? In 1991, Ukraine became independent of Russia. And so Ukraine as a country, they're not a very old country. They're old, they've been there thousands of years, but as the independence that they have, that started in 1991. In 1993, the first Lutheran church of our confession started. And that was with the help of Thoughts of Faith ministry. Thoughts of Faith is a parasynodical organization within the ELS, Evangelical Lutheran Synod, based out of Mankato, Minnesota. And they subsidized them quite well for about almost 20 years. And then they came to a point where they were not able to subsidize them. The first congregations, and let me just go to that one right away. You don't have to look at that blank screen up there all the time. They told me the clicker works. Bingo. First of all, Ukraine is about the size of Texas. I don't have a map of the United States on there, but the nation itself there. And point out where the churches are. As you look up there, about dead center, you have Kyiv. Please pronounce it Kyiv. Don't pronounce it Kiev. That's the way the Russians pronounce it. And so if I would pronounce it Kiev there, that would not be a very good thing to do right now. And so you go and you begin to see Kyiv, then go to your right, you have Kharkiv. Notice how close that is, Ruslan, that's Russia. Notice how close that is to Russia. On February 24th, 2022, Pastor Hostov, who serves the congregation in Kharkiv, heard the sound of what was construction vehicles in the street about 7 o'clock in the morning. He thought, why are people out that early in the morning doing that type of thing? And they look out the window and here are Russian tanks coming down the street. And the invasion began. And so on that date, the war that is going on in Ukraine started. And it started with the thought that Kyiv would fall in a couple of days. Kharkiv would fall in a couple of days. They would move on to Kyiv. They would take Kyiv, and then Ukraine would be theirs. They thought it would be very simple. If you look over to the right, the far right there, you have Luhansk and Donetsk. That's the Donbass region. You may have heard before the war of all the fighting that was taking place in the Donbass region. Well, that's Luhansk and Donetsk. I know a lot of people don't like history. You're going to hear a lot of history here in the first part. I'm sorry about that. In 1932 and 1933, there was what was referred to in Ukraine as the Great Famine. And there are monuments to it, and there are movies. Go home and Google it. The Holodomor. Hollow food hunger, more death, death by starvation, death by hunger. Russia came in and they basically said if anyone has more than 5 heads of grain in their house, they will be killed. So if you had a loaf of bread in your house, they would be killed. And it was thought to be about 6 to 10 million people were killed in that great famine. It was reported by the world news as the Great Famine, the starvation. Isn't it horrible what's going on in Ukraine, the Great Famine? Crops are great. It was a normal year for crops. There was plenty of food, but the people were being starved to death. And so what happened in that area? Well, people are starved to death, and so what does Russia do? They bring in people to live in those areas, to farm the fields, live in the houses. And so in 1991, when Ukraine becomes independent of Russia, you have a lot of displaced Russians there in Luhansk and Donetsk who do not want to be Ukrainians. And they don't want to be Russians. And so they're at odds. And they cause all kinds of problems. And that's where a lot of the Civil War was. And that's where really what the reasoning, what Putin had with the start of the war, he needed, because the people in Luhansk and Donetsk were asking us to save them from the Ukrainians, to rescue them, because the Ukrainians were torturing and doing all kinds of things to them, and we're going to come in there and liberate them. Well, they came and they found out they didn't want to be liberated. First thing that went wrong with their invasion. The second thing that went wrong with their invasion was they were not very good military people. Problem in Ukraine, as well as in Russia, is about 70% of the male adults are alcoholics. And you give an alcoholic who is drunk a gun and put him in charge of people, not good things are going to happen. And so there's a lot of atrocities in war. The other thing is like, how do I put a mindset on this? How do I understand people that think this way? The Russian families, the wives are saying, you are taking our husbands and you are putting them into war, and they're dying in war. And the Russian leaders say to the women, what does that matter? You can always get another husband. And how do you have such a lack of appreciation of life that you would have that kind of attitude? And so when people say, why are they just letting people die every single day? It's thought that still around 4,000 to 5,000 on both sides total, 4,000 to 5,000 a month are dying, soldiers, much less all the other things where people are dying from. So that's initially what's going on in the history behind that. So one other point of history, and there'll probably be others, but I'll just say one other point. 1939, Ukraine was for the most part independent, and Lutheranism was growing. And there were a number of Lutheran churches, especially in the West. As you're looking at that, on the right is the East and on the left is the West, okay? On the West, at Ivano-Frankivsk, that started, then at Lazarivka and Ternopil and Kremnitz, the Lutheran church began to grow, and there were thought to be as many as 200 Lutheran congregations there in the 20s and 30s, with about maybe 20,000 Lutherans. There were many Lutherans, there were many Germans that settled from Germany into this area. There's a lot of Germans in Ukraine, and they brought with them Lutheranism. Well, in 1939, Russia once again took over the country. And this time, what they did was they arrested or put into gulags all the Lutherans as they could, and many of the pastors were executed. This is from 1939 to 1943. And there was a tremendous, how do I say it, opposition, hostility, persecution of the Lutheran church. And when we say, well, why just Lutheran? Or you're just saying that, you know, maybe because you, whatever. The Orthodox Church and the government teamed together to want to rid that area of Lutheranism. And that hasn't changed much today. Lutheranism in Ukraine has many opponents, much opposition. A lot of that comes from the Orthodox Church. They do not want the Lutheran Church there, and so they team up with the government, who is very pro-Orthodox Church, to drive out the Lutherans. And so they did it with a vengeance in 1939. So Bishop and I, who talked daily prior to the war, and now we talk weekly. Bishop simply means president, so the president of the Ukrainian Lutheran Church, they're referred to as bishops. And Bishop and I were talking, he says, they are going to invade, they are going to invade. And you know what happened in 1939. So he was very fearful for the brothers, for the pastors of the Ukraine. He said if they invade, they will arrest our pastors and they will probably execute them. So what are we going to do? So prior to the war, in January and February, we made arrangements so that all the pastors would have, from the east, be able to go to the west, take refuge in the west. And if the war got that far to somewhere, then move somewhere else. We didn't make that step yet. We got the satellite phones. We had everything set up in case that would happen. We thought that the banking would be taken over by the Russians. We thought that the internet and exposure to the outside world would be interrupted. None of that ever happened. It still hasn't happened yet, but we thought it might because of what happened in 1939. Yesterday in the presentation, I would say over and over again, there's nothing new under the sun. What happened then is what's happening today. It is just an attempt to take over the country. When people say, why is he doing that? Why is he doing it? It's probably just as simple as these are, ungrateful children, and we need to take them back. We need to punish them, and we need to discipline them because they are all part of Russia. They aren't Ukraine. And so that's the setting there, and that's what's happening with regard to the relationships, with regard to Ukraine and Russia. Someone said to me yesterday, what is the relationship between the Christians in Russia? We have 3 churches there yet that we are supporting, and the churches of the Ukraine. Well, there isn't any interaction now, but as you can probably understand, it's a very, on the Ukrainian side towards the Russians, there's a real hesitancy to really have a meaningful fellowship with them. And they know that's wrong. They know they shouldn't feel that way, but of all the things that Russia is doing. And so hopefully at some point in the future that things can change and that could be a difference there that could be made. I'll just quickly go through. I'm going to kind of go clockwise here. Kyiv, Bishop Hornpachuk serves there. Kyiv is that Pastor Hostov, who also serves at Izium. Then we come down to Zaporizhia. Pastor Fishenko is there, also serves Tokmak. Right now, you draw a line from Izium down to Kherson and to the Odessa area there. That is all under Russian occupation now. So the church in Izium, not Kharkiv, that's outside of it, but Tokmak, Kherson, all under Russian occupation. We have no contact with them right now. Hamov and Ibanika, Pastor Soman. Pastor Titsky is in Brezhnev. Pastor Deitch is in Alexandria. And then we go to the left of Kyiv, Malin and Radishmir, Pastor Ditsky. And then Khmelnytsky, that is a mission congregation right now. No one is serving that. Kremnitz, we have Pastor, forgot his name. Ternopil, we have Taras Kakovsky, as of Laskarispa as well, and Ivalo-Frankivsk there in that area. Those are the churches that make up the Ukrainian Lutheran Church. There are 17 church bodies served by 11 pastors that make up that church body. So let's move along here a little bit. Those are the pastors. That is one of my Bible classes that I have with them. They always take a picture after every one, and those are the brothers, those are the workers in that. And yesterday I kind of went through, I don't have the time to today. Every one of them have a story. Let me just tell you a couple of them. Top row, second from the right there, Pastor Fishenko. Pastor Fishenko, when the Russians were, because he was in Tokmak, he had to be evacuated before the Russians came in. And he waited till the last minute, which was, we just kept on saying, get out, move out of there. The Russians are nearby. And he just thought, no, I'm going to stay here. And finally, it was like we had to leave. Well, they didn't get out of town. There was a bus of about 30 of them that got stopped by a roadblock there by the Russians. And they were going to Zaporizhia, which is about normally an hour drive, maybe an hour and a half drive. It took them 30 hours to get there. They were detained by the Russians at that checkpoint for about 29 hours. They're not allowed to leave the bus. And they all thought that they were going to die. They thought that they were going to be executed at some point along the way because now they were Russian prisoners, they were fleeing, and that. And so, his story, the Russians let him go. They got the Zaporizhia, and he said there was such a loud shouting in the bus of joy of being able to be free from that. That was his experience. I'm going to go to the middle on the right there, Taras Kakovsky. Shannon Bomi and I went to Ukraine on a mission journey, looking to see future projects for mission journey, so we went to kind of explore and look at the possibilities. Pastor Kakovsky was leading us around the city, and he came to a building, and he said, "This building gives me great sorrow." An obvious question, okay, why the obvious, or why the great sorrow? In the Second World War, the Russians had occupied and took prisoners in Ukraine, and they were holding the prisoners in that building. The Germans were coming, and the Russians had to flee. They had to evacuate. And rather than let the prisoners go free, they executed them all and then left. And his grandfather was one of them. And he says, "I always remember what happened in this building every time I go by it." And it's probably near where he lives, and so he probably has to see that. Every one of these people have stories of atrocities and of stories of the war. Bishop came to visit during the war to the United States. He came to Washington, D.C. to, I think, make an appeal to government. He was invited to come over by, I think it would have been Billy Graham Ministries, had some people come over to make appeal for help from the U.S., and he was one of them that was invited to come over. And he said, "If I come over, I want to come to Oskaloosa." And so he came there to Oskaloosa, and he met with us. You see Larry Schlomer there next to him, myself. Carl DeMars in the black gown is my former member who is a second career pastor in North Dakota. He is teaching Hebrew and Greek to the student there in Ukraine. And then Stefan Felgenhauer also works with the mission board that was also there that weekend when Bishop was with us. What's life like in Ukraine for the people? And I really feel bad. I hope the ladies yesterday, I said, I'm trying to make this not a very depressing thing, but so much is depressing right now in Ukraine. I've done presentations on Ukraine probably, 20, 25 times. And every time it kind of changes because conditions there change and situations change. At first I was kind of, the beauty of the country and all this and that. Now I could probably see some of those pictures that I took, and it probably isn't beauty anymore because they're probably destroyed. This little girl was walking to church with her parents one day, and there were some suicide drones that were flying overhead, or some missiles, not sure which, but they were intercepted and shot down. Well, you shoot down a missile or a drone, the pieces come down, and they fell on her and killed her on her way to church. And so the people live every day with the thought of, will this be our last day? Will a missile hit our building? Missiles have hit grocery stores, schools, playgrounds, hospitals, apartment buildings. Get my point? No military targets, just civilians. Why? What's the point of it? To what purpose is that, other than to demoralize the people to want to give up? And it's a sad situation. A common scene in most smaller cities and villages, whenever a soldier dies, they will have this type of procession for him. This happened to be an Orthodox funeral that was being held, but the townspeople would come out, and the coffin would be taken, and they would have this show of respect for the fallen soldier, and it happens every single day. And so, what is the mindset, or not maybe the mindset, the psychology of the individual living in Ukraine who constantly is dealing with death, constantly dealing with the loss of a loved one or friends and things like that? And it's just, that's what they live under every single day. Some of the destruction, apartment building that was hit, Mariupol. Mariupol was a town of about 750,000 people. If I had the back screen there, it would have been on the east side, southern part of Ukraine. And that was terribly bombarded in the early days of the war. The city was practically leveled. It went from a city of about 750,000 people to around 100,000 people. Where are all those people? There's a lot of questions on that. There's a lot of mass graves. There's a lot of people that are missing. There's a lot of families that do not know where their loved one. Bishops would be his nephew. They have not had any contact with him for about 2 or 3 months. Don't know if he's dead, if he's alive, if he's taken a prisoner, mass grave, no idea. And so this is a constant thing that goes on. And so this all brings to one important thing. What's needed? The gospel. The gospel is needed so much now in the midst of war, in the midst of death and things like that, to know my Savior lives, my Redeemer lives, and to know my sins have been forgiven. It's what I was trying to say in the sermon this morning. It brings great peace and comfort to know that my sins are forgiven. And so if I were in Ukraine and a missile hit today, I know that would be with my Lord. And I constantly reassure the brothers. I said, your work now is more important than it ever has been. You have more opportunity now to reach people than you ever have in the past. Because now people are willing to listen. And people are willing to hear what you have to say. And when they talk to people, they get a common refrain, and that is, you are different than the Orthodox Church. Your message is different. You talk about a hope of forgiveness, of love. You talk about undeserved. You talk about grace. Whereas they talk about you need to worship the icons. You need to do more prayer. You need to whatever, that type of thing. And it's resonating. One story. Pastor Titsky from Brezhnevata, he did heed the warnings when war started. He evacuated from the eastern part of Ukraine to the western part of Ukraine. He, along with Pastor Soman, went to where the pastor was there in Kremnitz, and I still don't remember his name. Old age is catching up to me. Sorry about that. Anyway, he went there, and he said to the bishop, he said, we are out handing out some aid to some people, and we found out that there was a couple families from Zhivna-Rivka, which is like 20 miles from Brezhnevata. They had also taken refuge in that area there. And so I told the bishop, I said, please tell him to ask these families if he might have a prayer with them, or might have maybe an opportunity to share a few words from God's word with them, maybe a small devotion. And he welcomed it with open arms. They said, oh, please do, please come, and that. And so he began to meet with them probably once, maybe twice a week. And so they were there in the Kremnitz area probably for about 3 months. And then they thought, well, maybe it's time to go back. Maybe it's safer to go back. It's not safe to go back, but safer to go back. Pastor Solomon and Pastor Titsky went back, as did these people, and they kept in contact with Pastor Titsky, and they said, could you come to our village and have a worship service for us there in our village? And so he went, and they had like about 70 people that came to that worship service. Now, on a bi-weekly basis, he goes there twice a month, they have over 150 people worshiping every Sunday. And opportunities. Of those 150, right now, I think it's up to like 60 are communicant members. They're all going through catechism class, which we call Bible information, and becoming members of the church. So in the midst of war, God is blessing. God is blessing the church with growth. Yesterday, I had more about the statistics of Ukraine. Ukraine right now, the Ukrainian Lutheran Church is probably around 700 members, but you can cut that number in half, and maybe even by 60 or 70% of where the congregations have lost members because they've moved away. But then you flip the table. In Kyiv now, they used to have around 70 people worshiping on a Sunday. They had over 200 on Easter Sunday. And on a regular basis, they're having about 150, and they had to go to 2 services. And so the word is growing, and the word is taking root in the lives of many people. The tanks. There's a church in Kremnitz, the Kremnitz congregation. We do most of our business, so to speak. When I've gone to Ukraine probably 6 or 7 times, and that is for pastors' conferences, which they have once a year. They have a pastors' conference, and then on the other year, they have what is called a Sobor, S-O-B-O-R, which is their synod convention. And so I go there for their pastors' conference once a year, their Sobor, and then sometimes I go for vacation Bible school in the summer months. This is the newly built church in Kyiv. I had mentioned about the opposition from government and from the Orthodox Church. You cannot have a public gathering unless you have running water. The church was built and dedicated, I think the next picture of, I think I have a picture of your brother up here. There's your brother up there in the middle with that, yeah. Oh, that's right, yes. Neil's there too, that's right. Anyway, this was the day of the dedication of the church in Kyiv. So I said, the government interference and who's prompting the government to interfere? Probably the Orthodox Church. You can't have services without running water. It happened to be one day when I was there, someone came to the bishop, it was on a Saturday, and said, we don't have water in the church. We were in the church at the time. And sure enough, there was no running water. And so he calls up the water department, or whatever they call them in Ukraine, calls them up, and they said, we'll come out right away. Well, they didn't come out. And then they said, they called back towards the end of the day because they hadn't come out yet. He said, oh, well, we'll have someone out there next week. I said, no, we need to have water. We have our service tomorrow. And he said, well, what we see is the problem's on your end. It's like, no, water comes into the church. It does not come out of the church to water the city of Kyiv and that. And so they said, oh, well, you'll have to come down and sign some papers to have someone come and look. A month later, they got someone to come and look and said, yeah, the problem is, your water has been shut off. You'll have to come down and sign some papers. And not this week, but maybe next week. And so this happened for 3 years. So they worshiped illegally for 3 years. But that's the opposition. It's just those types of things that just try to wreak havoc for the church. This is in Ternopil with a T. Well, I say it with a T. My wife says you say the two so quickly together, people are confused. You all probably remember Chernobyl with a C. Kyiv, about halfway between Russia and Kyiv is where Chernobyl is. And there are still areas in Chernobyl where you cannot go because of the radioactivity and that type of thing. That is still very much there. In Ukraine, there are only 5 church buildings. All the rest either worship in homes or rented facilities. And so that's another major concern that we have, to get them a church building, because it's not unlike America. Because the people will laugh at the Ukrainians and the Ukrainian Lutheran Church, and they'll say, you don't have a building, you don't have a church. And so that's hopefully something we can provide for them going forward. Okay. Inside, as I like, I see you had the banners and things there. Not too much different from the front of the church there, the altar area, the crosses, and so on. Very much ornate. They use the Eastern Rite. We have the Western Rite for worship there, much more like we would say like high church, with the incense and things like that they do. It's really a beautiful service and such. And so, and then people say, well, maybe if they changed their liturgy, they would have more people coming. You can't change a culture overnight. And that would change a culture, and it just wouldn't be proper for the people there in Ukraine. Lazarivka, they have no air conditioning, they have no heat. So in the summer it's terribly hot, people don't come to worship very much, in the winter it's too cold. I had gone one time to Kremnitz, it was in October, and there were these boards on the floor of his, and it's like, granted, they were not bad-looking boards, they were nice and things. And so I asked someone, I go, what's the deal with the boards? And they say, well, it's nearly winter. The floor gets cold. And so if you have the boards there, it keeps the feet from getting terribly cold. And so they put the boards out come wintertime and that. And so, and it might be a good point to put this in here. This was one of the worst winters on record in Ukraine. It was the coldest and with the most snow, and it affected a very large portion of the country. And in many areas in the country, they were without electricity 18 hours a day for almost the entire winter. And in some areas, they were without electricity for 2-3 days at a time. Now, the storm that went through here on Friday, I don't know if any of you lost your electricity. All I can remember was when our children were young, we lost electricity in an ice storm one time. And my wife and I were saying, all right, we got some candles here. We can have some family time. We can play some games and things like that. We're bored. We're bored. This is terrible. When's electricity going to come back on? It's just like, oh, wow. It's just like, come on. It's only been off for a little while. Can you imagine? 18 hours a day? What about hot food? What about heat? What about running water? What about all those types of things? Thankfully, they knew when electricity would come back on, so there was a mass thing of getting phones charged, making a hot meal and things. But there were a lot of people that died of exposure, that froze to death because they had no heat. Then you think some of these missiles hit apartment buildings that broke glass, and they didn't have the opportunity to get the glass fixed, or else there were holes in the wall, and there's maybe you could put some canvas or something up. Most of the houses were in the low 40s all the time. Never any warmer than that the whole winter. If it gets down below 70 in the house sometimes, oh boy, it's cold in the house. I can't imagine what they went through and what they're going through. And so the gifts that have been given that goes to help, we bought a generator for all the pastors, and we made sure churches have generators that can be used. We have made sure that they have enough fuel. We have made sure that they have wood-burning stoves for those that want them, and wood. And that's where your gifts are going. This is over and above the subsidy that they're receiving. Gifts have been given by members of the Wells to help them in situations like this. And Ibanika, that's the last of the churches that we have buildings for. This is in Southern. This is the German. Looks like one of our churches I grew up in Wisconsin. Looks like a lot of the churches that we had in Wisconsin that were of the older variety, big windows like that, and the bell tower and stuff. I missed the bell tower. I really liked the bell tower in my home church growing up, because it would always be a reminder as we were running across the parking lot, the bell was ringing, service was starting, and we're late, and so we'd run in quick and get there, and that. We're all creatures of habit, aren't we? It could have been 10 o'clock, we'd have still been late. Anyway, that was one of the German churches in southern Ukraine, and there were a lot of Germans there, but then again, thanks to Stalin, many of the Germans were taken prisoners and taken off the gulags. It's thought that about 3.5 million German citizens were taken on boxcars to Russia. And of that, it's estimated that about 40% of those died en route. It's like, how do you explain it? They need the gospel. They need the gospel. Okay? I just took this picture. I kept this picture in a Tuckmuck. It's just a reminder. I was there, and I've met with the people there, and now I don't know where they are because they're under Russian control. There's 3 stages of building a church in Ukraine. I'm not sure here. We have 2, I would imagine, the groundbreaking and the dedication. They have the setting of the cross, then they will have the groundbreaking, then they will have the dedication. The setting of the cross is a witness to the neighborhood that on this property, at some future site, a church will be built. And so I was there, I think this was 2018. I have not been to Ukraine since COVID, so I haven't been there for like 6 years because the bishop won't let me come during this time. Well, it's not really possible to come right now. But anyway, the setting of the cross. So that cross is still there. We still plan on building a church there in Brezhnevata. And we had a very wonderful day because the thought was the next year we were going to start building. Not to be. Vacation Bible School, kind of like our Vacation Bible School is here. Maybe I won't speak for you, but for myself. We have a number of visitors during the week. And we sing songs and things like that, and then we have them sing for the people on Sunday service after Vacation Bible School. And you have like 25, 30, or 40 come for Vacation Bible School, and then when they sing on Sunday, there's 10 people there. The same way here. They had like about 30 or some children there for Vacation Bible School, and this was the singing for the parents there on the worship service following Vacation Bible School. But still, like I said to people yesterday, parents want good things for their children. They want them to know Jesus. They want them to learn about the Bible. They're no different than you and I. And the children are no different than us. They have different customs and different things that they do, but they love the Lord and they just want to serve the Lord as well. This is that group in Shivnarivka. That's how it started, with that smaller group. Then it went to a little bit larger group. I got to skip a picture here. And this is the full group there in Shivnarivka, that mission church that is just exploding there in that. And the picture I bypassed, I'll get to it in a minute, it'll come up again. And this is the new mission now that we're looking at starting in Poland, in Poznan, Poland. A number of Ukrainians migrated or took refuge in Poland, in the city of Poznan. And that is the nucleus there, and they want to have worship services. So we're looking and hoping that this could be the first conservative Lutheran church in Poland. And so my wife and I will be going there in June to commission one of the deacons. And I believe the deacon is, on the left there, the second person there with the grayish type shirt with the black front there. And he will probably be the one that will lead worship services there. And then one of the ULC pastors will come like once a month or once every other month to see if we can get that mission going, so we keep them in our prayers. The local school asked Pastor Soman at the end of their school year if he would come in and greet the children and speak to the children and have a prayer with them. Church and state, they're very welcoming of Pastor Soman in that area. He's a wonderful man. He is just a tremendous guy with the best. And I pointed this out yesterday, and I'll point it out to you as well. Ukrainians, for the most part, when I got there, were passive people. It was very difficult for them to have relationships with other people. And that we think that's one of the keys of mission work here, is to establish a relationship. Know your neighbor. What's your neighbor do? Do you know what your neighbor does? Do you know what work he does? Do you know about anything about their family, their kids? Maybe ask, how are the kids doing? What were they up to? And then maybe somebody will come along, they'll say, oh yeah, we're going through a little difficult time here. And be an ear to listen. And all of a sudden you have a relationship built. There, if you go to your neighbor and want to ask a question, the first thought is, why do you want to know? Are you a spy? Are you someone that's going to turn us in? Because that was the mentality they had under communism. They were not free to do their own thing. I laugh. Our mission boards, and rightly so, they want to have like 3- and 5-year plans for the mission. What's your 3-year plan? What's your 5-year plan? If I said to the Ukrainians, what's your 3-year plan here? And they would look at me and they would say, we don't know what we're doing tomorrow, much less next week, much less 3 years, because you tell us what to do. Because they have a vacation Bible school in Kremnitz. 120 kids come. In the church, maybe 10 or 12 of those were members of the church. All the rest were visitors. And so I said, did you get names and addresses? He looks at me and he says, we would not think of doing that. You mean you don't follow up with these families that have their children come to vacation Bible school? No, because if we did, they would never come again. Because they would think that there was a reason why you wanted our name, and that we got put in a registry or something, or that we were going to be turned in. Because that's living under communism. They couldn't trust their neighbors. And so they lived, huddled in their houses, so to speak. And so when COVID came along, what did that force them to do? It forced them to use social media. It forced them to use things like Facebook, whatever things that they could use to get their message out to the people, because there too they could only have like 5 people meeting at a time. And all of a sudden, they had to be social. And you know what? They found out, wow, this is something that works. All right, that's great. And because people are listening and people are responding to it. And Pastor Soman, I went there, and it's like, they didn't greet the people before the service or after the service. You never greet the people? They said, oh, no, we don't do that. Why not? And so, not being critical, it's just, I'm trying to learn here. And I said, please try. So he began meeting the people at the door before they came, or before the worship service, and meeting with them afterwards. And I happened to be down there when I went to Mykolaiv and met with him, and I went to his church. And a couple of ladies came up to me and said, oh, we love our pastor. We love our pastor. He is so dear, such a wonderful man. He's like a son to us. Because he became personally involved with them. maybe a lesson for all of us as well. Get to know your neighbors. It's like when I go to a nursing home, I have a monthly service at the nursing home. And one of the first things I said, okay, I'll tell you, I'm a pastor at Grace Lutheran Church to kind of establish my, why I'm here and by what authority or whatever. I have a worship service. But I said, I'm not here to make Lutherans out of you. I just want to tell you about Jesus. I want to tell you what Jesus did for you. And the same way deal with your neighbor, Okay. Well, I go to this church. Oh, that's wonderful, and just carry on a conversation and get to know him, get to be friends with him. And that's what happened there. And all of a sudden, people love him. The children love him and things in a different way. And it's just really amazing. These are ones that I don't know where they are right now because this church is under Russian occupation. This is a group of German Lutherans there in Kherson, and Kherson is now fully under Russian occupation, so we have not heard from them. All we have heard is that they are alive. We know that. This is in Kremnitz. The gifts you give, we give out in care packages, but this happens to be, I believe, an Easter celebration where they had special gifts that were given. This is the Holodomor. The millstones no longer grind, no grain. A monument to that is the Holodomor in Kyiv, a reminder of what happened in 1933 and 1934. The world probably would have never known what Russia did, but Russian soldiers took pictures. And the pictures told the story. And then they had to accept the fact that this was a genocide. And so that's inside. You talk about a depressing place. Go in there and look at the pictures. It is really depressing. Perhaps maybe one of the last slides I'll show here, because we're probably terribly over time. I apologize for that. The lady sitting next to my wife, Rosemary, and I believe her name is Oksana. I could be wrong on that. She and her husband were in Kamyanets-Podilsky down in southern Ukraine. In 1980, Russia held the Summer Olympics in Moscow. May or may not remember that. That was the year we boycotted the Olympics because Russia was doing business in Afghanistan and stuff, and we were protesting that, and so we didn't send. But for Olympics, they have opening and closing games. Oksana is a dance instructor. She danced with Russia for the opening games of the Olympics. And take politics out of the world. She and the other dancers had it was an enjoyment, it was a time of her life that she'll never forget, being able to perform for the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games, along with the sisters and brothers that danced with her. We're just people. We're all people who need Jesus. Yes, we have different nationalities and things, but why do we have to be at war with one another? Why do we have to have those types of things? I don't know. It's not my job to know as a pastor. It's my privilege to be able to preach the gospel and to say. And so now they are living in Ukraine, and well, they always were living in Ukraine. It was just that it was under Russian control in 1980. And but that's just a picture. She's just a person, and the people she danced with were just equally individuals. They didn't want to kill each other. And so why do you have these people that are in positions of power that want to do horrible things? And that, again, they need the gospel. They need the love of Jesus. This is the group in Zaporizhia. There's a lot of beauty. Orthodox Church has a lot of beautiful churches. The traditional onion top domes and things like that. This is Sophia in Kyiv. This is a portion of it. You can't get the whole thing on a picture. There's so much of it. This individual, I'll save the story. How are we doing? We're over time. What time is it going to be? I'm sorry. Some of the foods there that you have, this is like a potluck. Going to top, coming across there, you have the different kinds of sausages and meats. A lot of fat. That might be where I got my heart attack. See, Rosemary, it wasn't that I eat at home. I think I'm going to blame it on Ukraine. They eat a lot of fat, and a lot of fat in their sausages and things like that. A lot of bread. Population in Ukraine for many, many years, and probably for centuries, was determined by how many loaves of bread they sold each day. Because every family had to have bread. And so if they sold 700,000 loaves of bread, then that was about the population of the city. And that. So that's how they determined things. Herring. I grew up in Wisconsin. Love herring. Next there, the reddish color, beets and potatoes and sour cream. And as I told the people yesterday, I like cottage cheese, and I'm okay with sour cream. I don't use it on a lot, but I like cottage cheese. And so they said, oh, you like cottage cheese? So they bring a big bowl of cottage cheese. And it was disgusting. It was horrible. I go, how can you ruin cottage cheese? It was like sour, and it was and the sour cream was like the same. And so I've learned to avoid those things and say that, dairy, no dairy. I'm being really polite. Anyway, that was the potatoes and things that were in there, and different types of things they eat. I know we're starting to lose people here, so let's just go see what I have left. One of the first times, and I think one of the only times, I can't think of too many other times that I had beef there as a meal. And so in the middle there with beef tips and potatoes and mashed potatoes, almost like, I grew up in Wisconsin, so almost like a Wisconsin meal there. It's like sausages and so on. Lack of beef. The age-old question that we always have when I go to Ukraine is the McDonald's. McDonald's are popular there, and the kids love them, people love them, and things like that. Is there beef in the Big Mac? Is the hamburger made of beef? And no one tells me. No one tells me for sure. So it leads me to think, okay, maybe, and I don't think there's any reason for it. It's not like they can't raise beef cattle. In Ukraine, there's 36 inches of topsoil. It's beautiful land for growing. It's a beautiful country. Tourism. There are probably 50 castles in the western part of Ukraine, some of them very much intact yet as, tourist places now. They're not used, obviously. This is one of the biggest ones in Kamyanets-Podilsky down in southern Ukraine. Second click, there we go. Second one, there's another one in that area there out in the country. Again, beautifully preserved. A lot of tourism goes there. This is one on top of the hill, the Bora Castle there overlooking Kremnitz. You can go up there and see the ruins. And finally, the Carpathian Mountains and the chalets there that they have for tourists, and there's skiing and things like that. But when my wife and I stayed there, there was like about 20, 25 of these chalets there around the area, kind of like cabins and things. And I think only 4 of them were being used, and this was in June. It's like, wow, why? I don't know, the tourism could be a big thing in Ukraine. And finally, this is again St. Sophia. And yes, the cows have the right of way whenever it's time for milking. And you do not mess with them. You stop and you pull over and you let them pass by. And in Ukraine, probably, I don't know about America, but there's really only 2 classes in Ukraine. You have the upper class and you have the poor. And in the back, you have tankers and stuff like that. And here you have a farmer. This farmer was probably a little more wealthy because he had 2 horses. Most of them only have 1 horse pulling the wagon. And in the Carpathians there where they farm around the mountains, most of that farming is done by hand. I grew up on a farm. My dad raised beef cattle, and I know what a scythe is. And we'd go out, we'd a lot of times hack off weeds with a scythe and cut it like that. They do whole fields with a scythe. And they'll rake them then into little piles there, and sheaves, not like a sheep or whatever, and do it all by hand. And that's in the poor area of Ukraine. And finally, this is my last slide. This is a hospital in rural Ukraine. It's very simple. People ask about them. I say, if I had an emergency in Ukraine, I don't think I would be too concerned about getting good care. But the only problem is, Bishop's mother-in-law was hospitalized here. So that's why I got a picture, because we stopped here. His wife went to see her mother, and we spent a little time there. And she was in the hospital for like, I think it was nearly a month. And I kind of just offhand said to the bishop, ooh, wouldn't want to see that bill. He goes, yeah, it probably would have cost about $100. And so then you begin to realize, okay, why is there so much bribery in Ukraine? So much bribery. If you and I had a typical medical issue where we had to have a CAT scan done or something like that, and the doctor would come and say, we came at the same time, and he would say to me, I will get you in 2 months. And he would say to you, I'll get you in tomorrow. Well, wait a second here. We came in at the same time. Well, what just took place? The doctor got bribed. And then people would say, well, that's a horrible thing. Yeah, that's terrible. The doctors are bribing. Well, maybe if you paid the doctors what they're worth. Russian influence always was education is a bad thing. We need to control people. Education makes people less controllable. And so they depressed wages on most of the higher offices, and higher education would have doctors and lawyers and things like that. Yep.
Yeah, I think maybe we should wrap it up.
Okay. Cut me off. That's good. That's good. I'll just say that is my last slide, actually, anyway, too. Thank you for the gifts that you give. I appreciate all of that, and continue to pray for the people in Ukraine. Let's have a quick prayer before we go. Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to help the people in Ukraine. We pray that you would give them courage and strength and fill them with your Holy Spirit. They might continue to minister to the people who need it so desperately. We ask your presence always and your protection. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you much for your time.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Thank you for coming.
I didn't, I know, but it was interesting, so I think people appreciate that. It was great. And I certainly learned. I was going to say at the beginning, but I said, you made everything. At the beginning, though, the association is like other countries. We don't have churches there, but we're in fellowship with them. Yes. They're part of the network of people that have their own church body, right? But you made that clear.